So again, welcome everyone. I want to make sure Christian's on before we start. Christian, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Good. Yes, we can.
Great.
Nice to see you.
Yes, nice to see you again.
So welcome everyone. Let's get started. This is the International Humanistic Management Association's Necessary Conversation with Christian Felber of the Economy for the Common Good today. If you've just joined, if you read through your chat, you'll see some cues, one of which is please keep yourself muted because we are videoing, and that recording will be available in coming days. And we are, now this is we're well into our third year of Necessary Conversations. These conversations are sponsored by the Donahue Center for Business Ethics and Social Responsibility at UMass Lowell, and they're hosted by the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham University. Again, this is an initiative of the International Humanistic Management Association, and we're so pleased for all of you to join us today with Christian. I'm going to turn it over just for a moment to Michael Pearson. Michael, welcome. You might say just a couple things about our EMA organization.
Sure. Well, thank you, Erica. Thank you, Kristen, for being on. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The International Humanistic Management Association is sort of an outgrowth of a wish and an intention to work on alternative management approaches. And we consider management pretty much any kind of organizational activity that intends to have a certain outcome. So management can happen within any type of organization, including governments, including nonprofit organizations, universities, churches, anywhere, including business. And so we're very happy to host a number of conversations with people that are in line with this intention and help us think through this big challenge as we're sort of facing as humanity in some ways. So International Humanistic Management Association has a webpage. You can sign up for information. So we'll all invite you to be part of it and get involved. I'll turn it back over to Erica. Thank you all.
Great. So I will introduce Christian, and then Christian will have about 20-25 minutes to take us through some updates on the economy for the common good. And then we'll open it up to the audience for discussion and Q&A, which we'll moderate through the chat. So as Christian is presenting, if you don't mind putting any questions or remarks in the chat, we'll moderate from there. Again, welcome to Christian. Thank you all for joining us. Christian Felber is an internationally renowned speaker on economic, social, political alternatives, a university lecturer, and a contemporary dancer. Christian has been a lecturer at the Economy and Business University in Vienna from 2008 to 2017, and is an IASS Fellow, which is the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, and the fellowship there inspired by the Potsdam Memorandum, which is a call to gather all sources of ingenuity and inspiration from academia, politics, business, and civil society to address the sustainability challenges of our time. He's been the initiator of the Economy for the Common Good and the project Bank for the Common Good. Background includes studies in Spanish, psychology, sociology, and political sciences in Madrid and Vienna, where he lives and works as an independent writer. Christian has authored several bestsellers: Change Everything, Creating an Economy for the Common Good, also Money, The New Rules of the Game, which was awarded the Get Abstract International Award of 2014, and the recent German original version of the soon-to-be published in English, Trade for Good. The Economy for the Common Good received the Zeit-Wyssen Award in 2017. The prize is awarded to outstanding individuals, initiatives, and companies contributing in the field of sustainable development. Prize winners are recognized for demonstrating how the gap existing between knowledge and action in the debate on environmental and social future can be filled. Welcome, Christian. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Michael. Maybe as for the background, the Economy for the Common Good, which started in 2010, is approaching the Humanistic Management Network also as a strategic partner of collaboration. And maybe the only personal data I would like to add is that I'm not an academic economist, because I was always interested in studying kind of universal sciences, but I haven't met a university at a formal university which offers universal sciences. I was for some time at the Schumacher College in Totnes in the southwest of Great Britain, and they consider themselves as a university for holistic science. And this is also my self-understanding as for the scientific background. And the economy for the common good, of course, is such a holistic product. It's not an outcome of the traditional economic science, but it's a holistic approach. Can you see my screens if I'm now advancing in the slides? Yes, you can. Great. So thanks for having 23 minutes to introduce this holistic alternative. There are some alternatives or many alternatives, but there are a few comprehensive and holistic alternatives. And maybe the economy for the common good is one of the few that really offer at least potential alternatives to not only the whole economic order, but also to the legal framework, which is embedding the economy and its broader cultural background. But let's go step by step. First of all, there are large majorities, both in poor and rich countries, which are longing for an alternative economic order. Of course, these are just surveys, but there are also votings which indicate in the very same direction. Maybe more surprising that even in the most affluent countries, we have similar results. And just look at the question, do you wish a different economic order? I think already the question is quite surprising. And the Bertelsmann Foundation is a very government-close think tank in Germany. So there would be not a suspicion that they would propose to overcome the current system. But 90% of the population do wish something completely different. For traditional economists, that's a surprise because they say we are getting ever richer. Per capita income is growing, GDP is growing, Germany is export world champion. But obviously, these traditional economic indicators and metrics are not those who matter most. And what matters most in humans' lives are different qualities and values, especially. And maybe I just jump over the analysis, but to give you an idea that we have really a holistic approach. We are looking at democracy, we're looking at ecology, we are looking at psychology, we are looking at system theory, we are looking at power concentration and gender relation, at everything virtually. And out from the bigger picture, from the, if possible, complete picture, we understand why 90% of the Austrians who are supposedly so well off are asking for a change of the system. Second preliminary remark, there are many alternatives, and some of them don't come from academia, but from the practice, and they are bottom-up initiatives, and they consider themselves as an answer to Margaret Thatcher's famous TINA saying. TINA stands for there is no alternative, and tapas is the answer, there are plenty of alternatives. Maybe we should also remember the other famous saying of Margaret Thatcher, which is there is no such thing as a society. If I can use my hands, I don't know if you can see my hands, if this would be our individual dimension and as humans, and with the corresponding values of dignity and freedom, and this would be our collective dimension with the corresponding values of solidarity, justice, and democracy. We don't say it's either or, it's not either capitalism or socialism, but it's a balance of these two dimensions, the individual and the collective dimension of us humans being, and the corresponding values all together in balance form the common good. This would be our answer to Margaret Thatcher saying there is no such thing as a society. Of course, there is such a thing as a society, and it really matters to our lives and well-being and the functioning of our democracies. And this is just a short list of these many alternatives that exist. And the economy for the common good is the last in a row because it's probably the youngest. We only started in 2010. And since then, we spread to some 30 countries at the moment. We are building the first local chapter in Denver in the United States and in Manila in Southeast Asia. Most of the existing 170 local chapters are situated in Europe and Latin America. A first meaning of being a holistic alternative is that we consist of a theory of change. You could call it a new narrative on a holistic economy that is serving life. We are a highly participatory movement which comprises thousands of individuals, hundreds of companies, dozens of cities, and it's still young and growing. And we also thought about what could come after the post-democracy that is analyzing Colin Crouch. First of all, I'm also a political scientist, amongst others, and I would prefer to call the current state of democracy a pre-democracy, which is a bit more optimistic than post-democracy. But the better and more profound democracy could to come might be a sovereign democracy. This is the alternative which I will propose at the end of my input. Let's go to the model. Now here comes a second meaning of holistic. This could be the opening up of any textbook of economics. Let's first define what is the economy, which are its broader contexts. There is one alternative textbook which is called Economics in Context, I think from the Tufts University, which has fulfilled as the first textbook in economics with providing a broader picture of the economy, its context, the relationships between the subsystem of the economy to its context, and then clarifying what could be or should be the goal of the economy. In our holistic vision, we propose that it should be the common good for several very solid reasons, but just to start with the distinction from the current system. In the current system, we hear a lot of times that the goal of economic activities is to make money or to increase companies' profits or to increase the GDP of a national economy. And these two possibilities, which should be the overarching goal of the economy, was already distinguished by Aristotle 2,300 years ago. And he not only distinguished two definitions of how to understand and practice the economy, but he even coined two opposed terms of two different possible economies. And I think this should also be in the introductory chapter of every economic textbooks, just to know that already 2,300 years ago, somebody made a clear distinction between two different types of the social science of economics. Because today in the leading textbooks, we learn to think like an economist, and there is just one possible way to understand the economy, and here are already two 2,300 years ago. First, the economy, where the name comes, oikonomia, where the name comes from. Interesting that oikos is the house and nomos are the moral rules. These are not natural laws, but these are moral rules thanks to which we want to achieve a specific goal. So there is a goal different from the contemporary definition of economic science. It's just the efficient management of scarce resources, but for which sake, which would be the goal. And 2,000 years ago, in the term oikonomia, there was already a goal, which is the well-being of all members of this household, or the common good, in just different terms. And money in this order. No, I see it's a bit strange. Maybe I put them here. Money is just the means, but never the goal. The goal is the well-being of everybody, the good life for everybody. And if money turned into the goal, inverting goal and means, then this would be not an economy anymore, an oikonomia, but its opposite. It would be krematistike, the art of making money and getting rich. Today we call it capitalism. We don't call it krematistike anymore, but capitalism has exactly the same meaning. I always recommend to mistrust every ism, because what is in front of an ism is usually exaggerated. And in capitalism, the value of capital is exaggerated, turning the increase of capital in the highest goal in the capitalistic economic order, which was considered as perverted and perverse by Aristotle And he said the economic order that is sound and natural is the oikonomia. And actually, if we look at the original etymological meaning of oikonomia, it's already an economy for the common good. So actually wouldn't even need to add the for the common good if you remembered the original meaning of the term oikonomia. But what happened is that the grammatistic majority amongst economists occupied the original term of oikonomia, kicked out or made us forget its original meaning, and loaded it with the opposite content, up to that extreme that today we are mixing up capitalism with economy, although these are opposite concepts. Now, why is this so important? Because first we have to decide which order we want. Of course, we can opt for capitalism, no problem. But if you want to find it, if you search constitutions, you will not find a single democratic constitution that opted for capitalism. All democratic constitutions opted for an economy. And this is a contradiction, because in the real economy, we don't have economies, we have grammatistics. And how can we prove it? Looking at the way of measuring success in the economy. Presupposing that success usually and correctly is measured first and foremost according to the achievement of the goals, and not first and foremost according to the availability of the means. That would be a failure of method. And if we now look how we today use to measure success in the economy, we see that on all levels, we are not measuring the achievement of the goal, which would be the common good, but we're measuring the availability or even the maximization of the means. Of all three metrics that are on my slides, financial return on investment, financial profit, or GDP, the unit of measurement is money, but money should just be the means and not the goal. If we agree that the goal should be the common good, then we need different metrics. And this is the central innovation of the economy for the common good, that we propose metrics on all levels of the economy that are aligned with the overarching goal of a true economy, of an etymological economy, according to Aristotle, but also according to the overarching goal of all economic activities according to democratic constitutions. It's not only in our constitutions, we have several surveys. If people want money to be the goal of the economy or the growth of capital, or if they prefer well-being of everybody or the common good to be the highest and overarching goal. And I know two surveys from Germany and the United Kingdom, and in both we have a constitutional majority of the population that would prefer the replacement of the GDP by something like a common good product. We're now on this way with the global development goals. The OECD had already developed the Better Life Index. Maybe the most charming common good product is the gross national happiness in Bhutan. And one of our proposals is that not experts should define top-down what the common good is, but that rather citizens should have the opportunity to define in bottom-up processes of which components the common good product shall be composed. This would be participatory processes. The second instrument is maybe what Adam Smith would have called the visible hand. The common good balance sheet for organizations and companies would guarantee that individual success, we remember Margaret Thatcher, and collective success of the whole society are reliably linked. Today, this relationship is not reliable. It could be like this, a successful company and a more successful society, but it could also be the other way around. And this is a flawed system. It should be always like this, or if a company makes society poorer, does not contribute to the wealth of the nation, but to the misery of the nation, then it should go bankrupt. And this is the only possible choice in the economy for the common good, either this or that, but not this. Because if we allow foul players and fair players at the same time, we know that the foul players will have an easier way because they have more possibilities, to put it this way. And that's why we need in between a visible hand that assures this relationship, that assures that a company can only remain successful if it at the same time makes the society more successful. And how do we measure it? We measure it with the common group balance sheet. And the common group balance sheet is composed in the green horizontal line by fundamental values of the society, human dignity, solidarity, justice, sustainability, and transparency and co-determination are not new values. They're the most frequent constitutional values that we found. So our proposal is to take democratic societies' fundamental values, which are already enshrined in their constitutions, seriously, and ask all organizations to which degree, how consequently do you live these values? And we measure then according to all their stakeholders, how consequently they do. There's a summary from a 11-year-old student in Spain. She summarized the common group balance sheet that it measures if the product or service of a company which it offers to the markets is meaningful, which is its impact on the environment and the global climate, how are the working conditions, humanity and dignity, what about the distribution, and who takes the decisions. I think that's the best elevator pitch of the common group balance sheet. But more important, it's not just the next generation of a sustainability report, but it should fulfill some very solid criteria, some of which are measurability and comparability. And then the result, measured not in dollars or euros, but in common good points, there could also be negative results, which is not on my slide now, would be published on all products. And if I scan the QR code, I can get access to the whole ethical information next to the financial information, which is an incomplete information. And thanks to this more complete information, markets will become more efficient because we would have more complete information to take rational choices. But maybe more important, we would still have the responsible companies and the sustainable companies with higher costs because they do not externalize the costs. The dumpers in all disciplines, they externalize costs, have lower prices for their products, and would still have a competitive advantage. Although now everybody knew why they have a competitive advantage, because they behave less ethically and less responsibly. So the last step to do is to invert again, or to correct also this relationship and turn an unethical market economy in an ethical market economy. How? Well, linking the common good balance sheet result to incentives for companies that already exist. All these instruments on my list already exist. We just would have to use them consequently to orient markets and finally an more ethical economy towards a society's goals and values. Maybe there is already one example. Portland in the United States is taxing companies within which inequality is excessive, with a higher tax rate than companies with a less excessive inequality. And if we apply these criteria, starting from subsidies to public procurement, tax rates, banks and stock markets only list companies if they do a common group balance sheet, and so forth, I think then the downward spiral and the race to the bottom, which we are testifying today, could be inverted in a race to the top, because we would use market forces, which we can design. We can design market forces, enhancing our fundamental values, instead of enhancing the most greedy, egoistic, or powerful actors on markets. The Bank for the Common Good we're trying to build in Austria. This is the summary. The summary is that we would change, let me see if I can put it here, yeah, the game rules from profit orientation and acting against each other. Literally, this is actually not competition, but counterpetition in correct Latin, into common good orientation and cooperation. It will still be a market economy, but not longer a capitalistic or crematistic market economy, but an ethical market economy. Instead of a counterpetitive market economy, it would be a truly competere in Latin means to search together. That's actually what we are heading for. We would want companies to cooperate and searching together for the best solutions for the society and the planet. And of course, these solutions cannot be measured in monetary terms, but in the terms of the society's goals and values. Okay, so this is the summary. Just to mention, the overall proposal is much more comprehensive, but I cannot introduce it in a 20 minutes input, just to let you know. Maybe this is a nice chart to put the economy for the common good between the two extremes of capitalism and socialism. And maybe if you look at the quotation from Friedrich von Hayek's mentor of the Austrians, Ludwig von Mises, he tried to implement a mental frame which says, if you're not a capitalist, if you don't agree with capitalism, you're automatically a socialist, and there is nothing in between. And same trick happened with free trade, which is actually enforced trade, because the only thing you can enforce in a free trade, in a so-called free trade agreement, is trade. You cannot enforce human rights or climate protection or social cohesion. You only can enforce trade. That's why actually it's enforced trade, not free trade. But if you criticize enforced trade, they say you're a protectionist, as if there were nothing in between. And this is my book for an ethical world trade. And the same with inequality. If you criticize unlimited inequality, they impute you automatically that you are against inequality at all, which is not true. You're just in favor of limited inequality, which is something in between. And, this is also the position I would give the economy in the orders. I'm coming to the end, so let me just give you some figures and actually pics about the movement. We have founded 30 associations so far, 11 on the national level. These were the protagonists at the beginning. Together with me, we started this movement 10 years ago almost. Now it's 2,300 companies in some 40 countries that are supporting, and 500 have done a common good balance sheet so far. We started from bottom up with a budget of €0. Now we have an overall organizational budget of €500,000. If you compare this, for instance, to the big corporations, which started with many $1 million from very powerful foundations, this makes us a bit jealous as for the financial resources. But maybe our approach is a bit different than others. Yes, but our companies are getting very renowned awards. The first bank with a common good balance sheet in Germany, the first health insurer with a common good balance sheet got the Global Challenge Award at the Katowice Conference of Parties, because they are seducing empathetically and tenderly their clients to eat less meat. This is a network of universities in Spain to teach and also research the economy for the common good. On their own initiative, I was just a guest of the collaboration to the Spanish Association. Municipalities are joining now more and more. They are turning into common good municipalities, and they're doing the balance sheet for the municipality and invite the private sector to do the balance sheet as well, and then promote the private sector thanks to subsidies, priority in public procurement, or differentiated tax rates, just for instance. There is a first law at the regional level to support the new model, which, this is the last slide on politics, was approved by an official body of the European Union, the Economic and Social Committee of the European Union, by a majority of 86%. This is significant because the Economic and Social Committee is composed by employers' organizations, trade unions, farmers' organizations, consumer protection organizations, and social organizations. It's very representative for the whole society. And I think I have 1 minute left, or I have 0 minutes left, but can I take a last minute for a last thought?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Because I already mentioned that sovereign democracy might be an answer to the analysis of the post-democracy or pre-democracy. And it is, again, meant literally. Sovereign comes from the Latin term superanus and means literally to stand above all. It's clear that in democracies, the sovereign instance are the citizens, but do they really stand above all? That's the question. I gave a thought about this, and this is a first brainstorming result. Which rights would we actually enjoy, or should we actually have, if we were truly the sovereign instance? And there's a whole list of rights which we should enjoy, and in most countries we don't enjoy any of these fundamental collective rights or sovereign rights. And just to come to the point, if the citizens could redefine or reform, for instance, the economic part of our constitutions, then I'm 100% convinced that in no country of this planet there would be enforced trade instead of ethical world trade. There would be banks too big to fail allowed to exist. There would be free movement of capital in tax havens, high frequency trade, shadow banks or vulture funds would not be allowed. And last example, inequality would be limited. Starting with the possible limitation of inequality in income. There are some scientific studies, which I quote later, and this is now the game I used to do with my audiences. And first, they can propose a maximum ratio of the inequality between the highest and the lowest income. And what they usually propose is the socialist and the capitalist extreme. Some say there should not be any inequality at all, factor 1. And some say there shall be no limitation to inequality, which is the current state of the art. But then and some of course say, well, maybe there should be some equality, but not higher than 10 times or 20 times or 5 times the lowest incomes. On the left side of the columns, you see what is proposed as the maximum inequality ratio. And on the right side, that's now very interesting. These are the votes of resistance. We're not measuring the hooray and the affirmation of the proposals, because then the billionaires could again hire a PR agency and the favorite proposal of the billionaire might be the winner. This is not possible if you measure the resistance. Actually, it's the degree of loss of liberty if this proposal is implemented. And the way how to measure the degree of loss of liberty is to measure resistance or pain. So actually we measure the pain with all proposals made, and the usual winner, including United States and Great Britain, is factor 10, which means that there would be inequality, but the highest incomes would not be higher than 10 times the lowest income. And if you compare that with reality, which is one, I think, very illustrative example of post-democracy, you see that our parliaments tolerate and thus are responsible for inequalities that are beyond reach of our imagination and very far away from the factor 10. These questions could be posed in democratic assemblies, which we have developed as prototypes. We will collaborate with the Presencing Institute of Otto Scharmer to implement them in the U-Labs and the S-Labs. And the possibilities to participate is on all levels, as an individual, as a company, a municipality, or a university. Together with Otto Scharmer, I invite you very warmly to join, support, or just get informed a bit more. Thank you very much for your attention and patience.
Thank you, Christian. We have a number of questions, and we'll turn to those. I'm going to start with two. The first is my own, actually, as I was doing some of the background reading and preparation. I'm wondering who or what groups are your most ardent or entrenched critics, and how have you used that controversy or any friction to your advantage, to the advantage of the economy for the common good movement?
Yes, a bit sad to say, but the fiercest critics are traditional economists and, of course, neoclassical economists. And the strongest argument is the image of man that they impute that we propose. Actually, we do not, in the forefront, propose a different image of man. We just propose different game rules. Instead of profit orientation and acting against each other, we propose common good orientation and cooperation. This is no different image of man. These are different game rules, first and foremost. But of course, in the background, we say that Homo economicus, which is actually Homo crematisticus, because Homo economicus would be a very good idea if you remembered what the term economy really means. But Homo crematisticus, of course, is not only a very bad idea, it's actually the implementation of what Margaret Thatcher was trying to tell us, but there is no scientific evidence at all for Homo crematisticus. And if there is scientific evidence, well, then it's for a more socially intelligent, emotionally intelligent, moral and cooperative human being. And I think this is what is most outraging economists, because part of their ideology, and of course I'm talking about classical economists and not heterodox or alternative economists and management theorists and scholars. This is what most outrages them, and also the resistance of opening up the broader picture, opening up the picture against towards interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. And as for the political field, the fiercest resistance is against only touching and questioning the possibility of limiting private property rights. Because in the current paradigm, it's private property that is holy instead of being life that is holy. And only if you touch this issue, you're automatically called a communist or socialist, with all the corresponding cruelties from Gulag to Mao and everything. But it's not a very serious discussion. Maybe a last one, which is more serious, but would companies still be profitable? Maybe that's a last question. Of course, if the game rules have changed, only if they behave in a more ethical form, they would still be profitable. It would be a precondition of being profitable, and financial profit is nothing bad. It's just not the first goal of a company. And in the time of transition, the common good balance sheet allows a company to do 1,000 steps to transform in tiny steps towards a more ethical organization. And of course, we recommend the companies to, in the first years, just do those steps that are not damaging the companies, because we're not inviting companies to commit suicide, but to start a long-term path of ethical transformation in which the first steps do not endanger their profitability. And last sentence, there is now a first empirical study with 200 companies, which says that those companies that do the common good balance sheet are not doing better in their ethical performance, but their financial performance at least is not affected negatively.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to David Wasilewski, who I know has collected a few of the questions from the chat as well. David.
Hello, everyone. Christian, thank you so much. This is an incredible presentation, and as evidenced by the number of comments and questions in the chat, has received great interest here. We're going to do the best we can to get to many of these. German, you had several questions. Would you mind asking, maybe picking your most pressing question out of the ones you've asked and get feedback from Christian?
The question 4?
There's German Atalara Bay.
Okay. I just unmuted my phone. Yeah, at the corporation level, what's your opinion about Johnson & Johnson's credo? Does it fit your common good economics theory, or doesn't it?
At the corporate level or the cooperation level?
At the corporation or corporate level?
Well, maybe one comment on the cooperation level, and I'm
corporation, the enterprise level, at the enterprise level, the firm level.
Yes, I see. Well, it's going in this direction. I have to say that there is still no transnational corporation that has done the common good balance sheet. The reason is because it's the most ambitious CSR instrument that is not fit for greenwashing, and it's so ambitious that many of the transnational corporations would have a hard time to get a positive result at all. This was shown on the one hand in a scientific study with 3 transnational corporations of the German stock market index. And on the other hand, we have bilateral personal relationships to some of the world's biggest companies, because their sustainability managers, or in some occasions even members of the board, are of course concerned with our common future. And they have done the common good balance sheet internally. And then they have seen that they would be, maybe if they're positive, they just have very few points, or even would have a negative score. And that's why there is no company so far that is doing the common good balance sheet among the transnational corporations. But as we are in touch with 15 or 20 of them, I think it's a question of time. As far as I know, it's now Unilever North America. No, it's not Unilever, it's Danone North America that is becoming the first B corporation on that level. And on my slide, what you see is a proposal to fusion all these sustainability instruments that are now on stage, in order to get one day full analogy to the financial balance sheet. What do I mean by that? Financial balance sheet, you cannot choose between 15 different standards. There's in each country just one standard, which is compulsory by law, which is audited externally, and the result of the external audit then has legal consequences. This for the financial balance sheet, and this is a compulsory regulation by the policymakers, although the financial balance sheet only measures the means of an organization. Whereas the ethical balance sheet, all of these, they measure the achievement of the goals and values. And that's why we say they have to become as solid and strictly regulated as the financial balance sheet. And the proposal is to unify them according to these 6 criteria or others. But in the end, there is just one legally binding standard that is externally audited by the ethical auditor, and the result of the ethical audit, which has to be measurable and comparable, will lead to differentiated incentives in order to correct this counterproductive incentive regime of today's markets. But to go back, Johnson & Johnson is one of these examples that is closest to what we are heading for.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Jacqueline Hill had a question from several minutes back. I think would be very interesting to tackle next. Jacqueline, are you still on?
I'm guessing you want me to ask the question. Yes, there's something about ethics which is singularly sort of individual and relative. And so the question I had was, how would you come up with a unified, truly democratically agreed set of criteria when, for example, genetic modification is not universally a good thing, a bad thing? There's lots of ways in which it might be used for common good, and there's lots of ways in which it might not be. So for me, the whole moral and ethical relativism is a difficult one, and I'm just wondering how you would manage that.
Yeah. Then just being a bit provocative, then how was it possible that we agreed internationally on the financial balance sheet? Which value does the financial balance sheet implement without anybody being against it? Isn't that the biggest surprise and miracle? Well, but answering seriously, our proposal is that first, democracy by democracy, we define which are the 20 most relevant ingredients of the common good, because the common good, if it's not defined by God or the emperor or the dictator, it has to be defined by the free and sovereign citizens. That's by definition of the term common good. Same with liberty, by the way, same with justice, by the way, same with democracy, by the way. In these bottom-up processes, which we call democratic assemblies, we suppose between 100 and 200 proposals, what might be those aspects of life quality that matter most. And out of these 100 to 200 proposals, we will filter the 20 most relevant ones. And by these, first, the national common good products will be composed. Maybe we can scale them up to an international global common good product one day. Then it would be quite similar to the Sustainable Development Goals, with the difference that they were not composed by the governments top down, but by the citizens bottom up. And now, if this process is getting to a unified result, there is no problem. We will have same metrics for all nations. If not, and this is actually the core of your question, as far as I understand, then we have different metrics in different countries. Is it a problem? I don't think so, because in the worst case, what would be the consequence is that we cannot trade freely. But free trade, anyway, as it's not taking care sufficiently of human rights and of climate protection and of social cohesion and just distribution, should be replaced by trade agreements and an international. I'm absolutely in favor of an international trade regime with international trade rules that follow common values. And now comes my most important point. If you look at global value surveys or of interreligious and intercultural value comparisons, we see that the fundamental values seem to be the very same in all cultures across time and space. And this is not just a surprise, but this has a very clear reason, which is that fundamental values very much serve to protect basic needs of humans. And the basic needs of humans are not only convergent, but are identical in all cultures, because we all belong to the same species. So I would have a strong hope that if the common good products in sovereign democracies were composed by the citizens, they would not only be convergent on the global panorama, but they would maybe even be identical, or at least could be synthesized to a global common good product. And maybe a last answer to your question: if you ask the citizens, are you in favor or against genetically modified organisms? I think it's a question of time where there is no nation on earth where the majority of the citizens would support a GMO in the food. So it's governments that are much more ready to violate human rights, for instance, or to introduce genetically modified organisms, or that allow the existence of banks too big to fail, but the citizens would not.
Thank you. I would like to invite Alan White, who has posed a question about alliances in this notion of sort of global opportunities. Alan, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Thank you. As I'm sure you know, the movement in Europe, the DEEM 25, as well as another step upward, the Progressive Alliance, led by Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister, is very early and very future is uncertain, but it is an effort to elevate to a supranational level certain values, including business values, for which there's no particular movement forward at this time, as this presentation has demonstrated. So my question is simply, are there conversations with Yanis or other such leaders who might be a partner, an ally in advancing economy for the common good?
Well, our conversations, we have more with scientific or ethical or even spiritual authorities rather than with politicians, because we have a political self-understanding of, I think in English you call it rather neutrality than equidistance. That's the German word. So we collaborate with all political parties that are open to take over some elements or ideas of the economy for the common good and welcome it, but we do not officially collaborate with any political party or a movement that is also in the parliament. And the experience is that at the local level, all political parties are very open for the economy for the common good, as if it were a movement for human rights or gender equality. We have mayors of all colors in 5 countries so far in Europe, and there is hardly a difference. We notice the problem rises with the power concentration. We have just few regional governments that are supporting us, and so far we have no national government that has passed a law promoting our just 8 years young movement. But you see, it's not so much an issue of which political party or movement. It's much more an issue of the level of power and its concentration, and that's why we are proposing not only an alternative content for the economy and economic policy, but also an alternative to the current democratic system, in order that one day we will not be completely dependent from the decisions or the decisions imposed by our representatives. I'm alluding Brexit, which was not an example of direct or sovereign democracy, because it was imposed top-down, the decision, after decades of not letting the citizens participate in fundamental political decisions. And the characteristic of sovereign democracy would be permanent participation of the citizens in at least fundamental, of course not in all, but in the most relevant and fundamental political decisions, in order then, if one day comes one referendum, which is an absurd referendum, and they can only say yes or no, which is again an absurd method of decision making, of course, what will show up is anger and frustration, and the decision will be a very bad decision. Just imagine if there had been 4 or 5 different choices, different models. I'm quite sure that that's exiting the European Union would not have been the winning proposal.
Thank you. So given our limited time, and we only have a few minutes left, I know David has flagged one more question at least. Note that we have a record of the chat, and we will make this available to everyone, and we can certainly continue the conversation with Christian as well. I'm sure you're open to that with folks.
I am.
Great. So David, I know you had a question, and then we'll wrap up in a couple more minutes.
Yeah, and I apologize to everyone we didn't get to, but the questions are in the chat, and as we say on the recording, these can be addressed offline. But Ravi, would you mind asking your question? I thought it was kind of an interesting one, and perhaps one that would be good to wrap up with. Ravi, are you still there? Well, let me ask it for Ravi. He asks about the tragedy of the commons, and
Yes.
he wants to know how your work promotes the free riders in the economy and how to deal with it.
Yeah, maybe let me look for my slide. I think the tragedy of the commons.
Ravi's here. Maybe he can elaborate.
No, David has said it already. I was just thinking about tragedy of commons, which is well articulated already in the existing literature. That promotes free riders, lazy people who don't create any value.
Yes.
So how do you overcome that? And a related question is also about the context defining the actions. You need to finally actually answer that question before you promote these very broad scoped suggestions for common good. Otherwise, it becomes an infeasible set when you try to implement this in a given context.
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat the second question? I'm not sure if I got it precisely.
No, the general frame for common good is so broad scoped that it almost becomes infeasible to implement in a given context. So a single person has to answer how the context frames the common good, because you cannot be doing everything for everyone.
I see. Okay. Then maybe let me start with the second one. It's comprehensive because when we started, there was already the answer and contestation or challenge, but it's just one idea, and it's not an alternative to the economic order we have. So very consciously, we designed a complete alternative, a new narrative, if you want so, in order that at least one can imagine how a complete and consistent alternative model could work. Of course, the implementation would be a path and process of decades and of many small decisions, and maybe just some elements or just one element are implemented. Actually, we are already there because we have 500 companies that have already done the Common Goal balance sheet. And what will be changed in the legal framework, this will be up to the democratic assemblies. And the democratic assemblies, they are open to all other initiatives. They're even open to the industrial lobbyists. If their proposal were the most convincing one, they would win the sovereign democratic process. I'm sure they will not, but they have the equality of opportunity to get their proposal through. But actually, the core of my answer is there is no need. The overall model has to be implemented. It's a set of ideas, and if one idea is implemented, it's great. If more ideas of it are implemented or combined with the ideas of other alternatives, it's also great. And now let me answer your first question on the tragedy of the commons. I think of 1 minute. Elinor Ostrom taught us how the tragedy of the commons can be transformed in the comedy of the commons. If you agree on strong rules democratically, and if you sanction the rule breakers, the free riders. That's what we have learned. And then the commons can work. And for me, the market economy is a common. And if we allow foul playing and fair playing, we today have the tragedy of the capitalistic market economy, because the egoistic, greedy, measureless, and irresponsible actors have the way through and are more successful than the more responsible players. And that's why we learn from Elinor Ostrom that we have to benefit those who are respectful with our fundamental values. And thanks to the Common Good balance sheet and other elements in the legal framework, we can convert them from losers in winners. We can convert their competitive disadvantage in a competitive advantage. So I see a clear analogy from Elinor Ostrom's lesson to the overall market economy. Although, and this is my last message, the economy for the common good is not only an ethical market economy and not only a cooperative market economy, but also a smaller market economy, in the meaning that maybe we just will work 20 hours on markets in order to have more lifetime for the commons, for ourselves, and for our beloved ones. This is the third characteristic of the ethical market economy proposal of the economy for the common good. So thank you. I think I'm just in time.
Christian, thank you so very much. Thanks to everyone for joining. We are officially going to wrap up right now. We'll stop the recording. But just again, many, many thanks for joining. We have many other conversations